It's finally the time of year where I could forget about summer and start thinking about fall. So the summer garden is obviously still cranking. I got tons of peppers here that are doing quite well. My tomatoes are still hanging in, producing tons of fruit. Flowers are still going, but we are in September now, which means that soon it'll be October and fall is just around the corner now. And I want to start thinking about where to put all of my fall plants. Now I will show you all of my fall seedlings because they actually look really good right now. I'll show you my tips and tricks for how that turned out. But I also wanted to walk around my garden and talk about my plan for the fall garden, where things are going, what my strategies are, and how I'm going to do it. So first of all, here's Cosmo in the most ridiculous position I've ever seen him in. He's got his butt on a quarter-filled bag of potting mix, and then the rest of him is in this half-filled 10-gallon bag. I don't know what you're doing, buddy, but it's looking very silly. So anyway, what I was trying to show you guys was not Cosmo here, but actually the seedlings. So here's what it looks like. This is the setup I showed you guys in a previous video where I built this little box essentially, and I threw some 40% shade cloth right over the top of it. 40% shade cloth blocks 40% of the sun from passing through, which means that all of these seedlings were able to grow in what is essentially some sort of shade. Now, the reason why this works so well is because summer is very hot and the sun produces a lot of heat. So by providing 40% shade, I was able to cut the heat down dramatically. But the thing that probably made a much bigger difference is what I did beneath. So take a look at this. The roots are emerging and they have soil on them. And that is because I actually filled these trays with soil and then watered into that. What that does is it creates a sponge at the base of all my trays, which will now fill with water. These plants are now able to access that soil and the water, which also has nutrients because it's extra soil. And that is why they look so green and big and vigorous. So these plants look amazing. I want to treat them with respect like they deserve. So now let's find good places for them in the garden and talk about what I'm going to be removing to make space for these guys. I have to say, this is the most beautiful sight I've seen in a long time. Cloudy weather, cold breezes, because this weekend it was literally 103 degrees in my garden, and that's not okay for me. I'm a San Diegan. It's not what I'm used to in my particular area. So anyway, the cool weather has arrived, and let's get into this plan. Let's kick it off with this garden here. It's the first garden I started with, and it's had a recent reset, and I have some interesting ideas for how I want to transition this garden to fall. First of all, I wanted to mention that in a previous video, I reset this garden and added all this wood chip mulch here. But the main thing I reset was that calamansi tree I was just showing you. All those citrus fruits were filling into my garden, fully spreading throughout and sucking up all the water that my plants actually needed. So that is going to be a reset deeper into fall, probably winter, where I'm literally gonna trench this entire perimeter of the garden, install a root block. That's going to be a hard day, but that's not what we're doing today. What we are doing today is figuring out where the fall garden's going. So over here, I have a pepper bed that's done all right. It's not the sunniest location in the garden, but the peppers still held on just fine. Tons of Fresno peppers that are doing quite well. Some of them that don't have leaf cover, like this one, did get some sun scald. So next year, I think I'll probably commit to growing all of my peppers under shade cloth because I'm sick of losing them to sun scald like that. They're very sensitive, and especially the sweet peppers. You could see right there, another saggy pepper because of sun scald. So what am I gonna do to transition this to fall? Well, instead of removing these pepper plants, because I have probably a good 1 to 2 months left of the growing season, what I'm going to do instead is take those small like cauliflower or broccoli starts, and we're gonna just attach them to the sides of the peppers here. So one's gonna go right there, and it's gonna be right on the emitter so it gets plenty of water. And what it's going to do is it's going to grow for about a month. In that month period, it'll get, maybe that tall, maybe a little bit bigger depending on how well it grows. And at that point, my peppers will be on their way out because it's going to start cooling down. I could cut my peppers out, let those broccoli and brassica plants take over. So instead of entirely ripping and resetting my garden, I'm going to let it naturally sort of happen over time, and instead of just removing plants like that. But this okra over here, I'm almost certainly am going to remove because it's done almost nothing for me. It's barely produced. It's just simply not hot enough in San Diego where I am to get good okra production. Next year, I'm gonna look for a cold climate variety of okra because the Clemson spineless just does not like it here in San Diego. Simply not hot enough. Now over here, speaking of heat waves, these two cucumbers got absolutely roasted. And I think the only reason these two died while the other ones on the edges here made it is because this sorrel has been growing for about 6 months now, and its roots are certainly spread out that far. So when it got really hot, it probably just sucked all the water out, outcompeted the cucumbers, and they roasted. So my plan here is to actually replace this with peas all along this empty spot. So I get some nice shelling or snap peas. I'm gonna cut this sorrel into a tiny little circle so it's not so aggressive. And then I'm going to plant the flanks of it here with like lettuces and arugula. That's close to my kitchen door, so it'll be very convenient to harvest that way. Now, over here on the pollinator patch, that's the word I'm looking for, I'll be filling this with flowers. The Shasta daisy this year just really did not have a lot of gas in it. It did one bloom and that's it. And it's just kind of looked like this for 2 months now. So that's going to need to come out. I'm over it anyway. It's a little bit too big. In terms of the raised bed, some of this chard got a little bit roasted. You can see the curled over leaves from that 103 day, but it's almost certainly fine. I just need to clean it up, remove some of the older leaves, and it'll do just fine. This grape tomato, we aren't that crazy about. I don't remember the variety name. I got it from Johnny's, I believe, but the texture is kind of mushy. The flavor is not that compelling. So it's just not worth eating for us. So there's no point in leaving it in here to take space. I'm gonna go ahead and remove it. Basil, likewise, I'm going to remove. I'll just give this one to the chickens. I have plenty of basil plants around. This one is fully flowering and already dying back, so there's no reason to keep it. The sun gold, I might just let continue because it's not really harming anyone. I don't have any particular plans for this trellis, but the rest of the space here is going to be bulked up with all sorts of classic winter crops. I might throw some cabbages in this bed, maybe a cauliflower and broccoli. You know, those are basically the main options here, especially from the starts that I have. As for this bed is done. It is absolutely getting attacked by leaf-footed bugs on the daily. You could see that the tomatoes are starting to be affected by it. When they start to color off like this, they're not evenly ripening. Like look at this one, it's green, it's red, it's yellow, it's got all sorts of weird colors. And take a look at this damage. This is classic leaf-footed bug damage. You'll see these indentations on the tomato where they've just sucked so much. You'll see all these little yellow dots from them stabbing the tomatoes over and over again. And they're just not good anymore. They don't taste good. The plant is, actually this one is surprisingly healthy, but the rest of them look pretty rough. And there's just no point in keeping them to be disease factories if I'm not even eating the tomatoes off these plants. Why am I keeping them? So this whole bed is a scrap. It's a full reset. I do have some fava beans already growing in here as a cover crop. So, oh wow, that's a ginger. That's random. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, I do have fava beans in here as cover crop, as well as over here with the eggplant. The eggplant I plan on overwintering, so I'm not going to remove it. I'm just going to trim it down a bunch and plant all around it so I can make use of that bed and keep this eggplant here for next year. So that's kind of the bulk idea and plan for this side of the garden. I don't think I'll be doing any cover crops over here. I did want to try to add some cover crop. The only thing I'm really doing in terms of building fertility that way is I have cover cropped the base of my fruit tree here with crimson clover. So that's about it. But I do want to get a little bit more into cover cropping. I just have a hard time giving up the space in the garden. So I'll show you somewhere else where I do have some plans for it. But now let's go take a look at the other garden and talk about that plan. A major part of my fall garden plan is actually inside the greenhouse. So let me give you a quick tour of what I'm doing in here and what my plans are, because I definitely want to try to push it this year when it comes to growing in the greenhouse through the winter. So here we are in the greenhouse, and you could see that it is a sea of green. Plants are really quite happy in here. The one thing that I've noticed recently is I'm starting to get some powdery mildew development, and that's just a matter of airflow, I think, for the most part. But I do have a fan running. I've tried many different options for orienting the fan. And I think it's just simply hot and humid in the greenhouse, and you're going to get powdery mildew. The cool thing is that the cucumbers absolutely love it in here. This is a 15-gallon grow bag with 1 cucumber, and I have it trained with 2 main vines, and they are setting wonderful pickling cucumbers. So I'm very happy to see that. One thing that's interesting is that my cucumbers in the greenhouse, and only in the greenhouse, are absolutely getting destroyed by these leaf-footed bugs, these leaf miners. So you see all these little patterns in here. That's leaf miner damage, very consistent. Over here, they've entirely skeletonized these leaves, which is quite crazy. Now to deal with them, you could spray or you could try to squish them, but I'm just kind of whatever, let it ride. These cucumbers are growing so fast, I'm not that worried about it. The plan for the fall though, I need to get back to that, is to have a lot of peppers in here. So I'm going to keep adding peppers. I might dig up some peppers, put them in containers and move them in here. But all of these peppers that you see over here are newly seeded. So these are not that old. I started the seed maybe 2 months ago and they've grown quite handsomely. They really have sized up quite a bit. I have a lot of harvest to do in a few months here. Right here is turmeric, which is absolutely gigantic. I've never grown a turmeric that looked this good before. Turns out they really love greenhouses, go figure. In the back here, I've got the ginger, which is also going to be a huge harvest because down there, it's entirely filled out its pot with all of these little stalks there. So what's my overall goal with the greenhouse in the fall? It is to get fruiting plants. So if I could get some more cucumbers going and have them produce through the fall into winter, that would be interesting. I don't know how many sunlight hours cucumbers need, but peppers for sure will continue to produce, at least some of these, like the Biquinho peppers. I've seen them fruit in December, so I'm not that worried about it. Some of these other ones I'm not so sure about, but I will also be adding some winter tomatoes, things like Glacier or Early Girl, to see if I can get some decent sized tomatoes in the middle of winter. So that's kind of the overall plan. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, basically trying to get summer in the winter time. And I'm very excited to see that at least everything that I've put in here so far is really loving it. So that's the overall plan for the greenhouse. But now we've got a big garden to walk through and figure out what the heck I'm gonna do over here. Since this garden is much larger, let's break it into chunks by first starting with my tomato bed. So this section of my garden has been where a majority of the tomatoes have come out, especially early in the season, because this was the first tomato section that I've planted in the garden. So this row up here, while it looks like it's been here for a while, has only been growing for about 3 months. This was planted much later. The 2 rows in the back here though, have been in the ground since about March. So if you take a look at the vines, they're fully cascading down. They've already grown all the way to the top and are now trailing all the way down to the bottom and then forcing their way upright again. So I have a lot of new tomatoes on the way down here, which I'm very happy to see. I'm actually surprised to see that. But the main thing I'm also seeing are a lot of those leaf-footed bugs, like those guys over there. You know, catch them. There they are right there. These are the worst. I hate them. I'm gonna kill these. So anyway, the plan for fall, what am I gonna do here? Well, I'm going to be removing this back row of tomatoes just because it's not getting enough light anyway, so there's really no reason to keep it. And then my other plan is to probably remove this section here. This tomato plant, as you could see, is much less vigorous than the one over here. So I wanna remove this panel, this whole wall, and then I'll be planting all of these new plants over here. I'll be planting over there. On this section, I used to have my wheat and my corn. I'm probably gonna just keep it with regular winter crops or fall crops. Things like, again, those brassicas, maybe throw some of my Brussels sprouts in here. Nice tall bed, plenty of light, and plenty of organic matter for those guys. As for the front row of tomatoes here, I haven't quite decided when their time has come. I have a lot of bolted lettuce down here, which I've just been ignoring, so I'll be removing that as well. But overall, the tomato bed, it's going to be working its way out of the garden over the next month or so. I might fully remove it by a month, but I say that all the time and I always just leave them for too long. So turning around, I have my wooden raised cedar bed here. This is the one that I burned to preserve. Again, it has those same grape tomatoes I mentioned earlier that I'm not that crazy about. So I'm okay with removing those. I have a Christmas melon there that I believe is actually ready to harvest, and tomatillos. Now the tomatillo is flowering again, but one of the plants died. So I don't know if these will actually form fruit. You normally need 2 plants in order to get tomatillos to fruit. So if they don't set any fruit on this round of flowers, I'll also remove that, do a full reset on this bed. The beans have only been in here for a short period of time. Some of them that I transplanted right before the heat wave, well, they weren't that happy about it. So that side's looking pretty weak, but the direct seeded ones, totally fine, looking lush. They will definitely produce beans for me before it's too late. This bed over here has pretty recently planted peppers. So I have shishitos here. Actually, it looks like I've got a meal of shishitos for sure. There's quite a lot on here. Tons and tons of eggplant. This year, my Asian style eggplant has just gone absolutely ridiculous. Look at that. Like, this is so dumb. I have more eggplant than I could ever know what to do with right now. And I love eggplant, but even for me, that's a little bit much. The watermelons, again, I'm not sure if there's enough time left in the season for these to actually properly produce. So we'll see. I'm gonna let them ride out. There's still plenty of heat. As long as they get enough light, they should be okay. This bed is one that I've been slowly working on. It is filled with this stinging nettle that, believe it or not, was planted on purpose and has now kind of taken over. I also have some of this Greek mountain honey here, which smells really quite delicious. It's like a sweeter version of an oregano or sweet marjoram. It makes quite a good tea apparently. And right here, this is a marshmallow plant. So you harvest the root for the marshmallow plant and it looks pretty crazy down there. But all of this down here is something I could turn into marshmallows, like the old school way without gelatin. So that's all gonna get fully reset, entire rip and reset. My goal here is with the raised beds to get those smaller flowers like the violas, the linarias, the lobelias, all along this front wall here. So they could cascade, rain down the side of the bed. Then I'll have my taller plants working back like stadium seating. So shorter plants up front, haven't quite decided what those will be, maybe some root crops. And then in the back, I'll put those bigger, taller plants like those broccolis, the cauliflowers, the cabbages, the Brussels sprouts, and so on. Now, turning around, I do have this big pepper bed, which has no signs of slowing down. So I'm not gonna mess with this at all for now. I'm gonna pretend like it's not here. And for this tomato bed, I don't know. It's honestly getting hit by disease quite hard, but it is still setting fruit. This is my youngest tomato bed. This has only been in the ground for about 2 months now. So pretty young, pretty short-lived so far. My goal is to at least tie these up a little bit better, trim off any of this lower stuff. And then there's a thin strip here of irrigation lines that's unplanted. So I could sneak in a couple plants right there. As for this bed in the back, the 4x8, again, this was recently planted. The peppers are growing quite nicely. They're looking pretty good. I have some kabocha squash that are forming and I'm very pleased to see that. And again, I have okra here, which I am totally fine with removing. And I think I'll do this similar to the pepper bed in the other garden I talked about, where wherever I have these kind of blank spots here, I will just pepper in starts. I'll let them fill in. This back row, for example, perfect candidate. I'll just remove all this lettuce. It looks honestly pretty rough after, it looks rough and leathery after surviving that intense heat wave. So I'll rip all this out and I'll put plants in here as well. Now, one more of the raised beds. Again, this is a melon bed and I am thinking of just resetting this. This is my least sunny bed, and to have all these melons in here late in the season, I just don't predict that I'll be getting a melon out of this. So this will be a full rip and reset, which I'm fine with. And again, we have a lot of starts. I don't know if I actually have enough starts to cover all the areas I talked about, but I definitely have enough starts to fill in all of the blank spots in my garden. So this bed, again, this is a no-till bed. This is one of my oldest beds that I just keep doing the no-till approach on. The only thing I do is I add compost. And again, it has some squash like the kabocha here. It also has, I believe one of these was a melon. And actually these two broccoli plants, really weirdly, I planted them for some reason and they're doing fine. So they've been in the ground now for 2 months or so and they don't seem to have any problems. So I don't know how they survived that intense summer. It's making me question what time of year I could grow broccoli. Maybe I could grow more broccoli than I realized, basically, but they look fine. A little bit suspicious about that, but I'm happy to take it. As for the main trellis over here, this is one of these things where I never really know how I want to use it in the winter time because there's not that many plants that like to climb a non-vertical surface, like a slope surface like this. Peas will go straight up, send tendrils, and attach to vertical members. But something like this, it's a little bit more challenging for them. So I'd love to hear you guys' suggestions on what you guys would put in here. For now, I have obviously a bunch of cucumbers. Looks like I actually have some to harvest. That's a good one. And I also have a lot of climbing beans like the Scarlet Runners, which are cold tolerant. So they'll probably produce for at least another 2 months. But at that point, I'll have to figure out what the heck I want to do with this. So I actually made a huge mistake here, which is I totally forgot to account for where my garlic's gonna go. So revised plan, this bed is going to be the garlic bed. 4x8, raised bed, clean soil, no fungal history, which is a previous problem we've had with garlic here. I had garlic rust in the previous years. So I think this will make a really nice garlic bed, at least one of them. This year I'm growing I'm hoping 300 to 400 garlic plants because we really wanted a lot more than we had. So this will be one of them. I don't know how many I could fit in there, probably somewhere like 100 to 150. So I'll need at least 2 more other places to figure that out. which will probably just be beds that will naturally open up at that time. I don't even have my garlic yet. I probably won't get it for another month, so I'm not too worried about it right now, but I definitely need to be aware and think about and remember to leave space for that garlic. So that's the basic plan for this fall season. A couple other things I'll mention is that this is just my first round of seeds. This week I'll be starting my next round, which will be mostly main crop. So it'll be a lot more cabbages, a lot more broccoli, a lot more cauliflower. For now, I only started a couple 6 cells of each. That's not enough to actually fill out my garden with those main plants. So it's just the initial sowing to get some in the ground early so I could harvest them in the fall. The rest of them that I started now will most likely be harvested sometime later in the winter, like January, February. And that is why you space out your sowings. So you could have a little bit of an early harvest from these guys, and then that later true winter to spring harvest from your other sowings that you start around this time of year. So if you have not started your fall seeds, please do it. Please at least try a small section of your garden as a fall garden, because it's very chill. It is not hot, the plants grow slower, there's way less disease, there's way less pest pressure. It's really my favorite season. It's just a little bit boring at times even because there's not that much to do, there's not that much to harvest, but it's also very relaxing. So thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. If you want to see any of the projects I mentioned or you're curious about them, also let me know and I'll see if I can make a video on it. Till then, I'll see you guys next time.